Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever you are, wherever you are. I hope that this live finds you blessed and in good spirits. If not, we say a special prayer for you today that the Lord will meet you where you are and reach every need that you have. Today we are going into the 14th chapter of the book of Exodus. If you have not already caught up from here, please do hit pause, go ahead on back and catch up with us. These are daily walkthroughs Monday through Friday, 7:15 a.m. Um, yeah, so let's get this set up here. Give me 1 second. Okay, I guess there we go. So we're going to the 14th chapter. Please, while we're reading through, please remember that the scriptures were not written directly to us, but they were specifically written for us to get to know our Creator, for us to transform our lives, and so many other things. So we are going to be learning about, or reading about, I should say, how the Egyptians pursued them. As we know, the Israelites were just freed from captivity after 430 years of slavery in Egypt, and Moses is leading them out. This is their exodus, and then we're going to read about the escape through the Red Sea. So let's go ahead and get into it, because of course I'm behind this morning. But yeah, remember to be looking out for things that point us directly to Christ, because they are always there. And then, of course, looking out for things that we can still apply to our lives even today. And it reads from the CSB Holman version. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of, I'm going to mess this up, Roth, between Migdol and the sea. All right, so he wanted them to go back and then camp out in a certain spot. You must camp in front of Baal Zephon, facing it by the sea. Very specific instructions for the campsite. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering around the land in confusion. So he would think, or he's doing this to make Pharaoh think that they are confused or lost. He's making the enemy believe that something is wrong, that their God has not brought them out safely, or that they don't know what they're doing, basically. So he's doing this to confuse the enemy. Okay. Um, that's pretty cool, actually. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering around the land in confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in. So Pharaoh will believe that they are lost. After all of this, he will still think that he has an upper hand on not only them, but the God that they serve. Okay. I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them. Then I will receive glory by means of Pharaoh and his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. So I think that's pretty not cool, because Pharaoh and his whole army dies, but that's his fault, man. Like, after all of this, even your firstborn son has now been killed. You have already seen the power of the God of Moses and the Israelites, and yet your heart is still hard, to the point where even at the time of their exodus, you're still going to try to pursue them, to kill them. Um, but you see how the Israelites did this. That little phrase right there, obedience, you guys, obedience over sacrifice is just, it's so important. Throughout this whole book of Exodus so far, we have seen this pattern of being obedient. Verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about the people and said, what have we done? We have released Israel from serving us. So he got his chariot ready and took his troops with him. He took 600, 600 of his best chariots. So it's not like he took a little lanky army or a little, like a few groups of soldiers. He took his whole army, and not even his whole, his best, with officers in each one. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out defiantly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, all horsemen and his army chased after them and caught up with them as they camped by the sea beside Piharath in front of Baal Zephon. So right where God told them to camp at, that is where they caught up to them. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians coming after them. The Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. They said to Moses, "It is because there is no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Isn't this what we told you in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians." They were so used to being in slavery, they were okay with remaining in slavery. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And how many of us have that same mentality today? It's just better that we live our life the way we want to, regardless if it's wrong, regardless if it's against God. We should just live our life the way we want to and just die in the wilderness. There's no point in this. There's no point in trying to be free. There's no point in trying to escape, only because they saw the enemy coming up from behind. But Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid." Mm-mm. You guys know there's 365 don't be afraids in the Bible, one for every day of the year. Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you must be quiet. That quiet part, be still, man. Just shut up. Why are you questioning him? Just shut up. Be quiet. Verse 15. The Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to break camp. As for you, lift up your staff, stretch out your hands over the sea, and divide it so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. As for me, I'm going to harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I'll receive glory by means of Pharaoh." You're not seeing this. Why are you crying out to me, Moses? Just do what I say and it'll be okay. Because guess what? I'm going to get the glory after all, like I always do. Like there's nothing new under the sun for me because I'm all knowing. um, let's see, Egyptians, so that they will go in after them. I will receive glory by the means of Pharaoh, all his army and his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I receive glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going in front of the Israelite forces, moved and went behind them. The pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them, protecting them. So remember, God was always with them. This pillar of, or this cloud, a pillar of cloud, it moved from the front to behind, protecting them from oncoming danger. It came between the Egyptians and the Israelite forces. There was cloud and darkness. It lit up the night, and neither group came near the other all night long. So they were even there for a night. But there was a cloud and darkness that lit up the night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back with a powerful east wind. Remember that the bad coming from the east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry land. So this wasn't just an instantaneous thing. This was actually something that took all night. This east wind that was coming was blowing all night to turn the sea into dry land, meaning that it wasn't even going to be that wet sand between the dry sand and the beach or the dry sand and the water on the beach, it wasn't going to be that wet, squishy sand. It was dry land you can pick up and it will fall right out of your hand. Glory be to God. The Egyptians set. Okay, so we're finishing up verse 21. So the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry land, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and on their left. So it didn't deplete, it didn't evaporate or whatever. It opened up with walls on both sides. The Egyptians set out in pursuit all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen, and went into the sea after them. During the morning watch, the Lord looked down at the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian forces into confusion. He caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. Let's get away from Israel, the Egyptians said, because the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Some of them were pretty smart. However, they still had this faith and servitude to Pharaoh, regardless if they saw him leading them directly to their demise. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the water may come back on the Egyptians, on their chariots and horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the daybreak of the sea returned to its normal depth. While the Egyptians were trying to escape from it, the Lord threw them into the sea. The water came back and covered the chariots and horsemen, plus the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone after them into the sea. Not even one of them survived. But the Israelites had walked through the sea on dry ground, with the waters like a wall to them on their right and left side. That day the Lord saved Israel from the power of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power of the Lord, the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and believed in him and his servant Moses. It still took all of that for them to finally fear the Lord and believe in Moses. Why? Because sometimes it takes the death of others, the death of ourselves, whatever the case may be, to finally fear, to reverence. Going on over to see what Doctor has to say. We got a few minutes left here. Verse chapter 14. Since I had started to read into it yesterday too. If you're still with me, guys, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up so I know that you're walking along with me. And if you feel led to, go ahead and hit that subscription button so you can get locked in. Hit the bell so that you're notified when new videos do post. But at this point, the Lord had Moses change the direction of the Israelites. Remember, they came back. He did this so that Pharaoh would hear of it and become convinced that they were wandering around in confusion. Excuse me. In other words, God's judgment on Egypt was not yet complete. One more time, he would harden Pharaoh's heart and receive glory through Pharaoh's foolish rebellion against his clear will. Then the Egyptians would know once and for all who God is. Pharaoh acted just as the Lord predicted. When he learned of the seemingly erratic actions of the Israelites, he asked, what have we done? We have released Israel from serving us. Then he took 600 chariots, sped after the people in hot pursuit, and caught up with them by the sea. When the Israelites caught sight of their pursuit, they were terrified and cried out to the Lord for help. Clearly, they thought themselves in no win situation. And true, they seemed to be caught between a rock and a hard place, literally, between the sea and the Egyptian army. But God, in his sovereignty, was directing this whole encounter. God, in fact, was orchestrating an apparent disaster, and he often does similar things in our lives today. Sometimes he will place people in a dilemma so that he can be glorified as he teaches us more about himself and accomplishes his perfect purposes in our lives. Out of the Israelites' fear rose some fussing. The hero who had delivered them from slavery quickly became an object of their scorn. So they kept asking him, like, why have you led us here to die? Why did we even follow you? Why did we do this? Blah, 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 blah. I can just hear them snickering during this time. In other words, they felt that they had been better off living as slaves. They were still stuck in that slave mentality. Just as people start to panic, it caught between death by drowning and death by the Egyptians. Moses declared, "Don't be afraid. Just shut up." Though their fear made them want to run, the Lord told them to stand firm. You too can choose not to fear by fulfilling your obligation as one under the protection of God by acting in spite of your fear. Notice that God didn't give Israel a plan of attack. He told them to see his salvation because he would fight for them. Their eyes were on the Egyptians and the sea, which means they were looking in the wrong places. They needed to shift their attention away from their fears in order to recognize that the Lord would indeed fight on their behalf. This is a reminder that when you're boxed in by any type of dilemma, when you're having any type of problem, you must trust in the Lord with your eyes and faith to see Him working through your circumstance, because if not, you'll miss it. You'll miss it. God called Moses to stretch his staff over the sea and divide it so that the people could walk through the sea on dry ground. Meanwhile, God would harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they would chase the Israelites. One second here. Sorry about that. Let's see. So God's plan was to bring himself glory through the actions of those who initially set themselves against him. While the Israelites prepared to march towards the sea, the angel of God, who had been leading them with the pillar of cloud, now stood behind them as a guardian, preventing the Egyptians from overtaking them. Moses did as God commanded, of course, obedience. Not only did God split the sea in half, but he also dried the ground so that they could walk through without getting muddy or stuck or whatever the case may be. This was a surprise level of provision they never would have expected. I wouldn't expected it. Even given the dramatic escape route provided. It suggests that we should look for the lavish, unexpected miracles that often accompany the bigger, more obvious ways that God works to help us when we're facing crisis. Thankfully, Him for such things gives Him the glory that He deserves. And if I know plenty of situations that I've been through personally where that is the case. I even went through one yesterday. Shout out to Greater Works Discipleship Ministries, because um, God will bless you in ways that you cannot think nor imagine. Um, and it's when you don't expect it, or when you're really not looking forward for it, or in ways that you didn't believe it would be. I'm hoping that makes sense, but God wants to bless you. So I give all glory and honor back to Him again for what had just happened in my life. Moses told the Israelites the Lord would fight for you, and they were about to see him in action. God threw them into confusion and caused the chariot wheels. Okay, so because the Egyptians continued to pursue them, and remember, they're on dry land because God made the sea dry for the Israelites. So the Egyptians have dry land right now that they're running on too. God created to cause confusion for them while the Israelites continued to get away. Pharaoh's forces, having just survived the plagues, immediately realized what was happening. These people were, I don't understand that you had the choice not to follow this lunatic. And unfortunately, they did. But his forces immediately realized what was happening. The Lord is fighting for them. They knew they should do in response was to run and go back. Let's get away from Israel. Finally, the Lord was ready to deliver the knockout punch. He again told Moses to stretch his hand up. If we know that the sea swallowed the Egyptians up. Not one survived. They were wiped out. Israel, however, walked safely to the other side of the sea when they saw the great power of the Lord. They then feared and reverenced him. Likewise, when you receive deliverance from a crisis, you should remember the correct response to it is to fear the Lord. Take him and his work on your behalf seriously, give him the praise he's due, and submit to his agenda. May the Lord add a blessing to not only the reading or the hearers, but ultimately the doers of the word. Take this and walk out in obedience. When you do, if you're in a crisis right now, if you're in a dilemma right now, when God finally brings you out of it, please remember to give all the glory and honor right back to Him. But then walk out in the faith. Don't keep going back to that slavery mentality like the Israelites did. No, continue to walk in faith, trusting that what God has for you during this time of trouble, during this time of dilemma, where your back is up against the wall, continue to look to Him. Don't look to that rock where you're at in your hard place, or look to the rock who is the Lord, I should say. Oh, goodness. I hope that that was a blessing to you. Comments, questions, concerns down in the comment section below. Head on over to my other social media pages and follow me there. Blessed by Grace, blessed by _grace is the tag name. And then, of course, once again, go ahead and lock yourself in if you feel led to do so. I do, of course, want to thank you guys, as always, for stopping by. Blessed by Grace with your girl Tanika on today's daily scripture walkthrough. And as always, guys, stay blessed.